My name is Amelia Gates, and at 62 years old, I've learned that respect isn't given. It's documented, earned, and when necessary, enforced with the precision of a legal instrument. Christmas night at Aurelia, the city's most exclusive dining establishment, I arrived wearing my cream wool coat and my grandmother's pearls, my silver hair styled in the elegant chignon that had been my signature for decades. The hostess, a young woman with perfectly applied makeup and a practiced smile, consulted her leather-bound reservation book with theatrical concern. "I'm sorry, but there doesn't appear to be a reservation under Gates," she said, her voice carrying that particular brand of polite dismissal reserved for people she assumed couldn't afford to be there. From across the marble-floored foyer, I heard my daughter Chelsea's laughter, bright, mocking, and designed to carry. She stood beside her husband Evan, both of them immaculate in their designer evening wear, flanked by my son Ryan and his wife Paige. They'd clearly been watching this little drama unfold. "Maybe a cheaper place will be good for you, Mom," Chelsea called out, her voice dripping with false concern and genuine malice. "There's a lovely little diner down the street that might be more appropriate." The other patrons pretended not to notice the family spectacle, but I caught the sideways glances, the whispered comments, the barely concealed embarrassment on behalf of the old woman being publicly dismissed by her own children. I smiled, the same composed expression that had served me well through 40 years of navigating corporate boardrooms and charity galas, and walked directly to the hostess station. "Would you please ask Aurelia Costa if she could spare a moment?" I asked quietly. The hostess looked confused. "Mrs. Costa? She doesn't usually. Tell her Amelia Gates is here." Within 30 seconds, the restaurant's owner emerged from the kitchen, a stunning woman in her mid-40s with dark hair pulled into a sophisticated twist and the kind of confident bearing that comes from building something extraordinary from nothing. "Amelia." Aurelia's face lit up with genuine warmth as she embraced me like a dear friend. "My angel investor, the woman who kept my doors open when everyone else walked away. Of course you have a table. You'll always have a table here." The transformation in the hostess's demeanor was immediate and profound. Suddenly, I was being escorted to the restaurant's most coveted spot, a private corner table by the window with a perfect view of the city lights and, more importantly, a clear sight line to where my children stood frozen in shock. As I settled into the plush velvet chair, Aurelia herself appeared with a bottle of champagne that cost more than most people's mortgage payments. "With my compliments," she said, her voice carrying across the now silent dining room. "For the woman who believed in dreams when banks wouldn't." I accepted the champagne with grace, then gestured toward my children's table. "Please send a bottle to my family as well, along with a note." Aurelia nodded and glided away. 5 minutes later, I watched a server present Chelsea with an identical bottle of champagne and a small cream-colored card. Through the restaurant's perfect acoustics, I could hear her voice as she read aloud, "To family, may you earn what you expect." Chelsea's face cycled through confusion, embarrassment, and finally, a dawning realization that the narrative they'd crafted, the useless old mother who could be discarded when convenient, wasn't quite accurate. I raised my glass in their direction, a small toast visible to everyone in the restaurant, and took a sip of champagne that tasted like vindication. As I savored my perfectly prepared dinner alone at my corner table, attended by staff who treated me with the reverence reserved for true patrons, I reflected on the evening's events. My children had attempted to humiliate me, to reduce me to an embarrassing obligation that could be shuffled off to lesser establishments. Instead, they'd revealed their fundamental misunderstanding of who held the real power in our family dynamic. Tomorrow at 9 a.m., I had an appointment with Jasper Klein, my trusts and estates attorney, a ritual meeting that happened every quarter, a detail my children had never bothered to notice or understand. For 40 years, I'd been building, planning, and documenting. My children saw only the surface, the quiet widow who wrote checks and asked no questions. They had no idea that I'd been keeping meticulous records of every favor, every bailout, every time they'd treated my generosity as their birthright. I don't forgive, I document. And tomorrow, those documents would begin their transformation from evidence into instruments. They thought they denied me a chair tonight. They had no idea I'd built the entire table. If you're enjoying this story of a woman who refused to be diminished, please hit that like button and subscribe for more empowering tales. If you've ever been told you're too old to start over, let me tell you, that's a lie. Your story isn't over, and you still have chapters left to write. Our best-selling book, Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain, is filled with simple, powerful steps to help you heal, rebuild, and fall in love with life again. Click the link in the description box and start your new beginning today. Because sometimes, the most beautiful revenge is showing people exactly how wrong they were about you. Memory, I've learned, is selective. My children remember their successes, their achievements, their moments of glory. They've conveniently forgotten the scaffolding that made those moments possible. I remember everything. Widowed at 50, when my husband's heart gave out during a routine business trip, I could have retreated into grief and let the world handle itself. Instead, I chose to become indispensable to the people I loved, believing that love was a currency that would be repaid with loyalty and respect. I was wrong about the repayment, but I was meticulous about the receipts. Ryan's DUI at 26 should have destroyed his budding legal career before it began. But a $15,000 contribution to the Right Rehabilitation Program, combined with a carefully crafted plea agreement and sealed records, turned a felony into a cautionary tale. He never thanked me directly. That might have implied he needed help. Chelsea's shoplifting incident at Bergdorf's when she was 32 was more complicated. The security footage showed her slipping a $3,000 bracelet into her purse, but the store's general manager happened to be someone whose daughter had benefited from a scholarship fund I'd quietly established. Phone calls were made, apologies were offered, and the incident disappeared like it had never happened. Evan's failed consulting business was hemorrhaging money faster than he could fabricate invoices. When his creditors started making threats, I stepped in with my personal guarantee on a $200,000 line of credit. The business still failed, but Evan avoided bankruptcy and the professional humiliation that would have followed. And Aurelia, beautiful, talented Aurelia Costa, had lost everything when fire destroyed her first restaurant. The insurance settlement barely covered her debts, and every bank in the city had turned her down for reconstruction loans. I found her crying in the ruins of her dream, and I wrote her a check for $500,000. No contracts, no interest, no timeline. Just faith in someone who reminded me of myself at her age. She built Aurelia into the city's most celebrated dining destination, and she never forgot who believed in her when no one else would. That's the difference between investment and charity. Investment expects returns. Charity hopes for gratitude. My children have been charity cases for decades. This morning, I sit in my study surrounded by 30 years of careful documentation. Bank statements, canceled checks, insurance claims, legal settlements, property deeds. Every favor cataloged like evidence in a trial that hasn't happened yet. But it will happen soon. I've spent 12 years maintaining a revocable living trust, updating it quarterly with Jasper's guidance. Annual cognitive assessments filed with the court ensure that no one can ever question my mental capacity when the time comes to make changes. Power of attorney documents naming an independent professional fiduciary protect me from guardianship challenges. I've been preparing for this day since my husband's death, though I hoped it would never arrive. My children have finally shown me who they really are when they think they have power over me. Last night at Aurelia, they revealed their fundamental belief that I could be discarded, dismissed, humiliated for their entertainment. They were wrong. I am not their victim. I am their creditor. And today, I begin the process of calling in debts that have been accumulating interest for decades. I have never kept score out of pettiness. I keep it out of prudence. Jasper Klein's office occupies the corner of a limestone building that has housed the city's most discreet legal practice for over a century. The morning after my public humiliation, I sit across from Jasper's mahogany desk, my hands folded calmly in my lap as he reviews the documents I've requested. "You're certain about this direction, Amelia?" His voice carries the careful neutrality of a man who's witnessed 40 years of family destruction through estate planning. "These instruments, once executed, cannot be undone." "That's precisely the point, Jasper. I want irrevocable." He nods and begins laying out the papers with surgical precision. The first document establishes the Empty Chair Trust, an irrevocable charitable remainder trust that will fund assistance for service industry workers and women rebuilding their lives after family betrayal. The name is my small private joke, though Jasper doesn't smile. The second document is my new will, stark in its brevity. Each child receives exactly $1, triggering the no contest clause that will void even that pittance if they attempt to challenge my decisions. The remainder of my estate flows into the Empty Chair Trust, managed by independent trustees who will never know my children's names. Transfer on death deeds for all my properties bypass probate entirely. My home, the lake house, the commercial building downtown, all transfer directly to the trust the moment I die. No waiting, no court oversight, no opportunity for interference. The most satisfying document is the personal guarantee revocation notice. Every loan I've backed, every credit line I've enabled, every financial lifeline I've provided, all terminated with 30 days' notice. I'll pay the penalty fees gladly. The professional fiduciary designation for medical and financial powers of attorney will prevent any guardianship attempts, Jasper explains as I initial each page. They can't have you declared incompetent if you've already designated someone independent to make decisions if needed. And my capacity assessments are current, filed and sealed. Annual evaluations for the past 12 years, all showing perfect cognitive function. Any attorney who tries to challenge your mental state will find a paper trail that's bulletproof. The signing ceremony is recorded on high-definition video. 3 witnesses, notary stamps, and my clear, steady voice explaining each decision. No one will ever be able to claim I didn't understand what I was doing. There is one more element, I tell Jasper as he organizes the completed documents. I want to hire Daria Quinn for forensic accounting. Jasper's eyebrows rise slightly. Daria Quinn is legendary in legal circles, a former FBI financial crimes investigator who now specializes in uncovering hidden assets and financial irregularities for private clients. What exactly are you looking for? I want to understand how my money has been used. Every gift, every bailout, every guarantee I've provided. I want to know if my generosity has been appreciated, or if it's been seen as an endless resource to be exploited. And if you find evidence of exploitation, I smile, the same controlled expression that served me well at Aurelia last night. Then I'll know that my new estate plan is not just legally sound, it's morally justified. Within a week, Daria's preliminary report lands on my desk like a guided missile targeting my remaining illusions about my children's character. Evan has been using false vendor invoices to skim cash from the business line I guaranteed. Ryan has been funneling payroll through shell companies owned by his golf buddies. Paige has been running up credit cards on a patient referral kickback scheme connected to Chelsea's wellness nonprofit. And Chelsea, my own daughter, has been using her nonprofit's donor-advised funds to pay for personal travel expenses. The financial abuse isn't accidental or desperate. It's systematic, ongoing, and conducted with the arrogant assumption that I would never look closely enough to catch them. They were wrong about that, too. As I close Daria's report, I feel the last remnants of maternal affection crystallize into something much colder and infinitely more useful. Love is revocable. My instruments aren't. Revenge, I've discovered, tastes best when served with perfect manners and impeccable timing. Which is why I decided to host an apology brunch at Aurelia 3 days after my estate planning was finalized. The invitation was handwritten on my personal stationery. Please join me for brunch to discuss recent misunderstandings and future family arrangements. Gracious, conciliatory, exactly what they expected from the old woman they'd successfully intimidated. They arrived precisely on time, Chelsea and Evan polished and confident, Ryan and Paige wearing the satisfied expressions of people who believed they'd established the new family hierarchy. I was already seated at our private table, wearing my pearl necklace and a smile that had been practiced in boardrooms for decades. "Mom," Chelsea began as they settled into their chairs, "we're so glad you've come to your senses about the other night. We were just concerned about your judgment in public situations." "Your judgment has always been questionable," Evan added with the kind of casual cruelty that he mistook for honesty. "But we're family. We'll work through it." I nodded thoughtfully and reached into my purse, withdrawing 4 cream-colored envelopes, one for each couple. "I wanted to give you these personally," I said, my voice warm with what they interpreted as capitulation. "I've made some important decisions about our family's financial arrangements." The envelopes were identical, each containing a single sheet of letterhead and a smaller document. I watched their faces as they read. Confusion first, then growing alarm, then the pale recognition of people who just discovered they weren't as clever as they thought. The letter was brief and professional. Effective immediately, all personal guarantees provided by Amelia Gates are hereby revoked. Outstanding balances become the sole responsibility of the primary borrowers. Termination fees and penalties will be paid by the grantor to ensure clean separation. Additionally, all ongoing financial assistance, including monthly advances and expense coverage, ceases as of this date. This decision is irrevocable and non-negotiable. Respectfully, Amelia Gates. The smaller document was even more devastating. Official notices from their respective lenders that the guaranteed credit lines would be called due in full within 30 days. "Mom, you can't do this," Ryan said, his lawyer's training kicking in even as his face drained of color. "These guarantees are binding contracts." "Indeed they are," I replied, sipping my mimosa with evident satisfaction. "Which is why I'm paying the termination penalties to break them cleanly. Expensive, but worth every penny for the peace of mind." "The monthly advances you've been giving us," Chelsea began, "were gifts freely given and now freely withdrawn. But our expenses, our commitments, are your responsibility, not mine." Evan tried his usual bluster. "This is financial abuse of a family member. We could take you to court." "You could try," I agreed pleasantly. "But I should mention that I've had forensic accountants review all our financial relationships over the past decade. The findings are illuminating." The color drained from his face as the implications sank in. "What kind of findings?" "The kind that suggest my generosity has been systematically abused through false invoices, shell company payments, and charitable fund misappropriation. The kind that might interest the IRS and the State Attorney General's office." The silence stretched until the server approached with a check for our brunch. She set it discreetly beside my place setting, but I made no move to take it. "I believe this one is on you," I said to Chelsea. "I'm sure your nonprofit has adequate petty cash." Chelsea fumbled for her purse, withdrew her credit card, and handed it to the server with shaking hands. 5 minutes later, the server returned with an apologetic expression. "I'm sorry, but this card was declined. Do you have another form of payment?" The humiliation was exquisite. My successful, sophisticated children, sitting in the city's most exclusive restaurant, unable to pay for a simple brunch because the financial foundation I'd provided had just been pulled out from under them. I settled the check with my own card, left a generous tip, and stood to leave. The termination notices take effect in 30 days, I said calmly, adjusting my pearl earrings. I suggest you use that time wisely. As I walked through Aurelia's dining room, I felt the weight of other patron stares, not the pitying looks from Christmas night, but something else entirely. Respect, perhaps, or recognition of power properly exercised. Behind me, I could hear the urgent, hushed conference beginning at our abandoned table. Planning, scheming, trying to figure out how to survive without the financial oxygen I'd been providing for decades. They mistook my silence for consent. An expensive mistake. Desperation makes people predictable. Within 48 hours of our brunch confrontation, my children launched their counterattack with all the subtlety of a blunt instrument. It began with social media whispers, carefully planted suggestions that I was experiencing memory issues and making concerning financial decisions. Chelsea posted a heartfelt message about supporting aging parents through difficult transitions, while Ryan shared an article about elder financial abuse that somehow failed to mention that the abuse was coming from inside the family. The culmination of their strategy arrived at my door on Thursday morning. Dr. Patricia Summers, a geriatric psychiatrist and old family friend, accompanied by Chelsea and Ryan for what they described as a wellness check. "Amelia, dear," Dr. Summers said as I invited them into my living room, "your children are concerned about some recent decisions you've made. They're worried about your clarity." I served coffee in my best china and settled into my wingback chair with the composure I'd cultivated over 6 decades of handling difficult situations. "What kind of clarity are you questioning, Patricia?" "Well, the sudden changes to your estate planning, the withdrawal of financial support from your family, these rather dramatic shifts in behavior." "And you believe these decisions suggest cognitive impairment?" "Not necessarily, but your children feel that a professional evaluation might provide peace of mind for everyone involved." I nodded thoughtfully, then reached for the manila folder I'd placed on the side table before their arrival. "I appreciate your concern, Patricia, which is why I've maintained annual cognitive assessments with Dr. Harrison's clinic for the past 12 years. I handed her the sealed envelope containing my most recent evaluation. Comprehensive testing completed just 2 months earlier, scoring in the 95th percentile for my age group across all cognitive measures. Dr. Summers reviewed the documents with the careful attention of someone whose professional reputation suddenly hung in the balance. "These scores are exceptional, Amelia. There's absolutely no indication of any cognitive decline." "I'm glad to hear it," I replied pleasantly. I'd hate to think my decision to stop enabling financial fraud was somehow evidence of mental incompetence. The words hung in the air like a blade. Chelsea and Ryan exchanged glances that spoke volumes about their growing panic. "Mom, we're not committing fraud," Ryan began. "Aren't you?" "Because the forensic accounting report I commissioned suggests otherwise. False invoices, shell company payments, charitable fund misappropriation." Should I continue? 3 days later, they filed the guardianship petition. Chelsea, as my daughter, requested the court appoint her as guardian of my person and estate, citing diminished capacity and vulnerability to financial exploitation. The hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday in Judge Harrison's courtroom, a woman who'd known me for 15 years through our shared work on the hospital board. I appeared with Jasper and 2 additional attorneys, all of us carrying thick files of documentation. Chelsea and Ryan sat across the aisle with their court-appointed counsel, looking like people who just realized they'd brought wooden swords to a gunfight. "Your Honor," Chelsea's attorney began, "Mrs. Gates has recently made dramatic and irrational changes to her estate planning, cutting off her own children without warning or justification." Judge Harrison listened patiently, then turned to Jasper. "Mr. Klein, how does your client respond to these allegations?" Jasper unsealed the first video. High-definition footage of my estate planning meeting showing me clearly articulating each decision, explaining the reasoning behind every change, demonstrating perfect cognitive function and legal capacity. The second video was my response to their allegations, recorded specifically for this hearing. In it, I methodically detailed their financial exploitation, their public humiliation tactics, and their assumption that I could be manipulated or dismissed at their convenience. Your Honor, I concluded in the video, my children's petition isn't about protecting me. It's about accessing money they've been systematically stealing from me for years. Judge Harrison's expression grew increasingly stern as she reviewed the evidence. The cognitive assessments, the financial records, the video testimony, everything painted a picture of competent decision-making by a woman who'd simply stopped tolerating abuse. Petition denied, she said finally, her voice carrying the authority of someone who didn't appreciate having her time wasted. And furthermore, I'm issuing protective orders preventing any further harassment of Mrs. Gates regarding her financial decisions. In the courthouse hallway afterward, Chelsea cornered me while the attorneys were gathering their papers. This isn't over, she hissed, her composure finally cracking. You can't just cut us off like we're strangers. I looked at my daughter, this woman who'd publicly humiliated me, attempted to steal from me, and then tried to have me declared incompetent when I fought back, and felt the last vestiges of maternal sentiment crystallize into something harder and infinitely more useful. You're right, I said quietly. You're not strangers. Strangers have the excuse of not knowing better. They brought me to court to take my voice. I used it to take their credibility. This story keeps getting more satisfying. If you're loving Amelia's strategic approach to dealing with ungrateful family members, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Remember, our book Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain isn't just about healing. It's about reclaiming your power and never letting anyone make you feel worthless again. The strategies in that book have helped thousands of people transform their pain into strength. Check the link in the description and start your own empowerment journey today. Because sometimes, the best revenge is simply refusing to be anyone's victim. Some people believe that justice is a dramatic thing, courtrooms and confrontations, shouting matches and public scenes. In my experience, real justice is quieter, more methodical. It arrives through proper channels, documented evidence, and the careful application of rules that exist for exactly these situations. Daria Quinn's final report arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered personally with a kind of professional gravity that suggested its contents would change everything. I read it in my study while sipping coffee from my favorite china cup, the same cup I'd been using for 30 years of morning routines. The documentation was thorough and damning. Evan had created 17 different shell companies to funnel money from the business line I'd guaranteed, each one designed to look legitimate while facilitating systematic theft. The total amount approached $300,000. Ryan's scheme was more sophisticated, using his legal knowledge to create consulting agreements with non-existent companies, then paying those consultants with checks that ultimately ended up in accounts he controlled. His theft exceeded $200,000. Page's operation involved patient referrals to specialists who paid kickbacks to Chelsea's nonprofit, which then paid inflated consulting fees to Page's company. The money laundering was elegant in its complexity and obvious, once properly traced. And Chelsea, my own daughter, had been using her nonprofit's donor-advised funds to pay for European vacations, designer clothes, and luxury hotel stays, all carefully disguised as conference expenses and charitable outreach activities. The combined theft exceeded $700,000, stolen from me by people who smiled at family dinners and signed birthday cards with love at the bottom. That afternoon, I made several phone calls. The first was to the IRS whistleblower office. Form 211 allows private citizens to report tax fraud in exchange for a percentage of any recovered funds. I filed reports detailing each child's unreported income and fraudulent deductions, providing Daria's evidence package as supporting documentation. The second call was to the State Attorney General's Charity Compliance Unit. Chelsea's nonprofit had violated numerous regulations governing the use of donor funds, each violation carrying significant penalties and potential criminal charges. The third call was more personal, to the CEO of Evan's largest client, a publicly traded company with strict ethics policies. I didn't accuse or threaten. I simply provided copies of the public records showing his ongoing financial crimes investigation. The fourth call was to the State Bar Association's ethics hotline. Ryan's law license required him to report any criminal investigations, a requirement he'd obviously failed to meet. I made these calls from my study, surrounded by my husband's law books and the family photographs that now felt like evidence of a different life. No anger, no vindictive satisfaction, just the methodical application of appropriate consequences. By Thursday, the dominoes were falling. Chelsea received a certified letter from the nonprofit board requesting her immediate resignation, pending the outcome of regulatory investigations. Evan's largest client suspended their contract due to ethical concerns regarding ongoing legal matters. Ryan got a letter from the State Bar Association scheduling a disciplinary hearing. Most satisfying of all, their banks began filing suspicious activity reports based on the patterns Daria had documented. Once those reports entered the federal financial crimes database, their access to credit, bank accounts, and business loans would become exponentially more complicated. I learned about their mounting panic through my network of friends and acquaintances, the same social connections they'd tried to use against me during their guardianship attempt. The whispers now flowed in my direction. Their business failures, their legal troubles, their increasing isolation as former friends distanced themselves from the growing scandal. On Friday evening, I attended the theater, a production of Lady Macbeth that seemed particularly appropriate. During intermission, I encountered several acquaintances who expressed their concern about my children's difficulties in tones that suggested they understood exactly who was orchestrating those difficulties. Such a shame about Chelsea's nonprofit troubles, one woman murmured with a kind of false sympathy that barely concealed her satisfaction at witnessing a social downfall. "I'm sure everything will work out as it should," I replied pleasantly, sipping champagne that cost more than my children could now afford to spend on groceries. My phone was set to Do Not Disturb, so I missed the desperate calls, the frantic texts, the increasingly hysterical voicemails from people who were finally understanding the true scope of their situation. I would listen to them later, of course. Documentation is important. But for now, I was content to enjoy the second act, where ambition and cruelty met their inevitable consequences with the precision of a well-written script. You don't need to raise your voice when you can raise the right flags. Financial pressure, I've observed, reveals character the way heat reveals the true nature of metal. Some materials become stronger under stress. Others simply melt. My children were melting spectacularly. Evan's consulting business collapsed within 2 weeks of losing his primary client. Without my guarantee backing his credit line, the bank called the loan due in full. A sum he couldn't possibly meet given that most of the borrowed money had been systematically stolen through his shell company schemes. Ryan's law practice faced similar pressures. His commercial condo, purchased with money I'd essentially provided through various financial guarantees, went into default when he couldn't make the payments without my continued support. Chelsea and Evan quietly listed their suburban mansion, hoping to sell quickly before the foreclosure notices became public record. Paige began making desperate calls to her former colleagues, trying to resurrect the medical career she'd abandoned when my financial support made it unnecessary to work. I learned about their mounting desperation through Victor Santos, the private investigator Daria had recommended for ongoing surveillance. His weekly reports read like financial obituaries for lives that had been built entirely on borrowed money and my misguided generosity. Evan's been meeting with bankruptcy attorneys, Victor reported during our Tuesday morning briefing. Ryan's applied for 3 different paralegal positions. Chelsea's resume is being circulated for pharmaceutical sales jobs. And Paige, trying to get her medical licenses reinstated. Apparently, there are some compliance issues with her previous practice that make employers nervous. The compliance issues, of course, were the patient referral kickback schemes that Daria had documented. Once those allegations entered her professional record, Paige would find legitimate employment nearly impossible. But the most satisfying development came when Ryan's commercial property went to trustee sale. Through an LLC I'd established for exactly this purpose, I purchased the note from his lender at a substantial discount, a transaction that was perfectly legal and financially sound. As the new owner of Ryan's debt, I had several options. I chose the most poetic. I exercised my right to take possession of the property, then leased it to the Women's Legal Aid Clinic for $1 per year. The irony was exquisite. Ryan, who'd used his law degree to steal from me, would now watch his former office space provide free legal services to women escaping financial abuse from their own families. Chelsea's house sold after 3 months on the market, but the proceeds barely covered their outstanding debts. They moved into a rental property in a neighborhood that would have horrified them just 6 months earlier. Not unsafe, but undeniably ordinary, the kind of place where people worry about grocery bills and car repairs. I drove past their new address once, not to gloat but to document. The small ranch house with its postage stamp lawn looked tired in the way that properties look when they're inhabited by people who've given up on appearances. Through Victor's surveillance, I learned that Chelsea had found work selling pharmaceuticals to veterinary clinics, a significant step down from her previous nonprofit position, but honest work that required her to acknowledge her reduced circumstances every day. Evan managed to find employment with a small consulting firm that specialized in helping failing businesses navigate bankruptcy procedures. The salary was a fraction of what he'd earned during the years when my guarantees allowed him to play at being a successful entrepreneur. Their social circle contracted rapidly. Former friends and business associates distanced themselves from the growing scandal, leaving my children isolated with only each other for support. A particularly cruel irony since their unity was born from shared resentment of the woman who'd provided everything they'd lost. But the financial pressure was only the beginning of their education. Real estate, business opportunities, and credit access could be rebuilt over time with hard work and honest living. What they couldn't rebuild was reputation. What they couldn't repair was the trust they'd squandered. What they couldn't recover was the respect they'd never actually earned. On Christmas Eve, exactly 1 year after their public humiliation of me at Aurelia, I received a card from Chelsea. The return address showed their rental house. The card itself was obviously purchased at a grocery store rather than the boutique stationery shops she'd once frequented. Inside, her handwriting was careful, desperate. "Mom, I hope we can find a way to move forward. I miss our family." I read the card once, then placed it in my fireplace and watched it burn. Some relationships can't survive the revelation of their true nature. Some bridges, once burned, leave only ashes worth remembering. You can't be evicted from a house you never owned. You can be evicted from a fantasy. Some revelations require the perfect stage. For mine, I chose Aurelia again, the same restaurant where my children had tried to humiliate me exactly 18 months earlier, the same private dining room where they'd learned their first lesson about underestimating me. The invitations were engraved on cream-colored stock. "Please join me for a family luncheon to discuss future arrangements." Formal, final, carrying the weight of decisions that had already been made. They arrived separately, Ryan and Paige first, looking uncomfortable in clothes that had seen better days, followed by Chelsea and Evan, whose designer facades were beginning to show the wear of financial stress. They took their seats around the circular table with the cautious movements of people who'd learned to expect unpleasant surprises. I was already seated, wearing my grandmother's complete pearl set and a black dress that suggested both elegance and finality. Beside me sat Jasper Klein, my trust attorney, with his leather portfolio open to reveal documents that would reshape their understanding of everything they'd assumed about their futures. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice carrying the kind of calm authority I'd perfected over decades of chairing board meetings and managing crises. "I wanted to discuss some important family business with you directly." Chelsea leaned forward slightly, hope flickering in her eyes. After 18 months of financial struggle, she was clearly desperate for any sign that reconciliation and renewed financial support might be possible. "Jasper," I continued, "would you please explain the current status of my estate planning?" Jasper cleared his throat and opened his portfolio with the practiced efficiency of a man who delivered similar news many times before. "Mrs. Gates has executed an irrevocable trust structure that directs the disposition of her entire estate," he began, his voice professionally neutral. "The trust includes several specific provisions I'd like to outline." He lifted the first document, my will, printed on heavy legal paper with gold embossing. First, the no contest clause. Any beneficiary who challenges the will or trust arrangements in any way will forfeit all bequests and receive nothing. Second, the specific bequests. Chelsea Gates Whitaker receives the sum of $1. Ryan Gates receives the sum of $1. Evan Whitaker receives the sum of $1. Paige Gates receives the sum of $1. The silence that followed was absolute. I watched the color drain from their faces as the implications sank in, not just the symbolic dollar amounts, but the finality of language that left no room for interpretation or appeal. Third, Jasper continued relentlessly, the remainder of Mrs. Gates's estate, valued at approximately $12 million, transfers to the Empty Chair Trust, which will provide assistance to service industry workers and women rebuilding their lives after family financial abuse. Chelsea made a sound like a wounded animal. "Mom, you can't, this isn't legal." "It's completely legal," Jasper replied calmly. "Mrs. Gates has been planning the structure for over 2 years. Every provision has been carefully reviewed and validated." I reached into my purse and withdrew 4 identical envelopes, each one cream-colored and sealed with my personal wax seal. I placed them on the table with the deliberate care of someone laying out evidence. "Inside each envelope, you'll find a photograph," I said, my voice steady as surgical steel. "It was taken on Christmas night 18 months ago, right here at Aurelia." Their hands shook as they opened the envelopes. The photograph was professionally shot, capturing the exact moment of their laughter as they watched me be turned away from the hostess stand. Their faces were clear, their expressions unmistakable: joy at my humiliation, satisfaction at my dismissal. Below the photograph, in my careful handwriting, was a single line: "I fund legacies, not laughter at my expense." "You planned this," Ryan said, his lawyer's mind finally grasping the scope of what had happened. "The whole thing, the restaurant, the humiliation, everything." "I planned nothing," I replied. "You provided the humiliation entirely on your own. I simply documented it." Chelsea lunged across the table then, her composure finally shattering completely. "You vindictive bitch. After everything we've been through, everything we've lost." Security appeared instantly, Aurelia's staff, discreet and professional, gently but firmly restraining my daughter before she could reach me. The other diners pretended not to notice, but in a restaurant like Aurelia, word of such scenes travels quickly through the city's social circles. "Ma'am," the security guard said quietly to Chelsea, "I'm going to need you to come with me." As Chelsea was escorted from the dining room, still screaming accusations and threats, I turned to the small monitor Jasper had placed on the table. With the touch of a button, he activated the video of my estate planning session, crystal clear footage of me explaining each decision, articulating my reasoning, demonstrating perfect mental capacity and legal understanding. "Your mother's wishes are documented witnessed, and legally unassailable, Jasper said to the remaining family members. Any attempt to contest these arrangements will trigger the no contest clause and result in the forfeiture of even the $1 bequests. Ryan stood up slowly, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. This isn't over. Actually, I said, adjusting my pearl necklace with hands that remained perfectly steady. It is. You've received everything you've earned from me. Evan tried one last desperate gambit. What about family? What about blood? I looked at him. This man who'd stolen from me, lied to me, participated in my public humiliation, and felt nothing but the cold satisfaction of a job completed with precision. Blood is an accident of birth, I said quietly. Family is a choice. You all made your choices very clear. After they left, I sat alone in the private dining room, surrounded by the detritus of relationships that had finally been reduced to their essential truth. Aurelia herself appeared with a bottle of champagne, not celebratory, but ceremonial. To endings, she said simply, raising her glass. To accountability, I replied. The champagne was perfect, like everything else at Aurelia. The silence was even better. Inheritance isn't a right. It's a resume. They never turned one in. The beautiful thing about consequences is their momentum. Once set in motion, they tend to accelerate, gathering force and creating secondary effects that reach far beyond the original actions. My children's world continued to unravel with mathematical precision. Evan, facing mounting legal pressure from the state investigation into his fraudulent business practices, made the desperate decision to accept a bridge loan from questionable sources, the kind of people who don't require credit checks, but do require payment regardless of circumstances. When the loan came due and Evan couldn't pay, he panicked. Victor's surveillance reports showed increasingly erratic behavior, meetings in parking garages, phone calls at odd hours, the hollow-eyed look of someone who'd finally run out of options. The end came on a Tuesday night in February. Evan, apparently convinced that he could somehow escape his creditors by leaving the state, loaded his car with whatever cash and valuables he could carry and headed for the interstate at 2 a.m. He made it 12 miles before losing control on a curve he'd driven safely hundreds of times. The state police report cited excessive speed and possible alcohol involvement. There were no other vehicles involved, just a man running from consequences that had finally caught up with him. Ryan's downfall was more prosaic, but no less complete. 3 weeks after Evan's death, he made the catastrophically poor decision to break into my lake house, apparently convinced that he could find some evidence of my manipulation that would invalidate the trust arrangements. The property's motion sensors triggered automatically, alerting both the security company and local police. Ryan was arrested attempting to jimmy the lock on my home office door, carrying a crowbar and a desperate plan that made no legal sense whatsoever. The breaking and entering charge was serious enough on its own, but Ryan's existing probation from a prior DUI conviction made it a probation violation as well. Judge Martinez sentenced him to 18 months in county jail, with automatic suspension of his law license pending completion of his sentence. Chelsea, meanwhile, watched her husband die and her brother go to prison while facing her own mounting legal troubles. The state attorney general's investigation into her nonprofit had uncovered additional financial irregularities, and she was now facing potential criminal charges for charity fraud. But perhaps the cruelest twist was that her pharmaceutical sales job, which she'd seen as temporary employment while rebuilding her life, had become permanent necessity. Without Evan's income and with legal bills mounting, she was entirely dependent on the salary from work she considered beneath her education and social status. I learned about these developments through my usual sources: Victor's reports, newspaper articles, court filings that were matters of public record. I felt no satisfaction at Evan's death. That had been his choice, his panic, his failure to face consequences like an adult. But I felt no grief either. Grief requires loss, and I had lost these people long before they died, or went to prison. I had lost them the moment they revealed who they really were when they thought they had power over me. The ripple effects continued for months. Chelsea's former friends completed their social exodus, unwilling to associate with someone whose family had become synonymous with financial fraud and criminal behavior. Paige, widowed and unemployed, moved across the country to live with her sister, effectively disappearing from my life and my city. On the first anniversary of Evan's death, Chelsea sent me a letter, handwritten on plain stationery, the kind you buy at drugstores when you can no longer afford personalized items. "Mom," she wrote, "I know things between us are broken, maybe permanently. But Evan is dead, Ryan is in prison, and I'm alone with legal bills I can't pay and a future that looks nothing like what I thought it would be. I'm not asking for money. I know that's impossible now. I'm just asking if there's any part of you that remembers loving me." I read the letter twice, then placed it in my fireplace and watched it burn. Some relationships can't survive the truth. Some love can't survive the revelation of its object's true character. Some bridges, once burned, leave only ashes worth preserving. 6 months later, Chelsea's criminal trial began. I attended every day, sitting in the gallery's back row, my presence a reminder to everyone in the courtroom of exactly why we were there. She was convicted on 3 counts of charitable fraud and sentenced to 2 years in state prison. As the bailiff led her away in handcuffs, she turned to look at me one last time. I met her gaze steadily, my expression reflecting nothing but the calm satisfaction of watching justice complete its work. They kept asking what I wanted. I wanted them to stop mistaking me for the bank. 2 years have passed since Chelsea's conviction, and the silence that follows true endings has become my preferred soundtrack. Christmas Eve finds me at Aurelia, seated in the corner booth that now bears a small brass plaque, reserved for Amelia Gates. It's not ostentation, it's documentation of respect earned through actions rather than inherited through blood. The empty chair fund has flourished beyond my original expectations. The trust now provides assistance to over 300 service industry workers annually. People who understand the value of honest work, who treat others with dignity regardless of their circumstances, who build their lives on substance rather than appearance. Last month, I funded emergency housing for a waitress whose grown son had stolen her rent money. The month before, I covered medical expenses for a line cook whose daughter needed surgery but couldn't afford the hospital bills. These people, strangers who've shown more loyalty and gratitude than my own children, have become the true beneficiaries of the wealth I spent decades accumulating. Aurelia joins me tonight, as she has every Christmas Eve since my family's final dissolution. We don't discuss the past, there's no need. We simply enjoy excellent food, carefully chosen wine, and the comfortable silence of people who understand that some victories are best savored without commentary. The new scholarship program is fully subscribed, she mentions as we review the dessert menu. 15 students starting culinary school in January, all of them women rebuilding their lives after family betrayal. Appropriate, I reply, selecting the chocolate soufflé that will take 20 minutes to prepare. I have nowhere else to be, no one waiting for my attention, no obligations beyond my own choices. My phone sits silent on the table, no desperate calls from jail, no pleading letters forwarded through attorneys, no attempts at reconciliation from people who finally understand the permanent nature of certain consequences. Ryan was released from prison 8 months ago and immediately left the state. His forwarding address is a post office box in Oregon, and his attempts to rebuild his legal career have been unsuccessful. The Bar Association's ethics violations remain on his permanent record, making employment in his chosen profession virtually impossible. Chelsea served her full sentence and was released to a halfway house program in another city. She works in a laundromat now, minimum wage labor that requires her to acknowledge her reduced circumstances with every paycheck. I'm told she's applied for food assistance and lives in a studio apartment that would have horrified the woman she used to be. Paige remarried, a man she met through an online dating service, a divorced accountant whose modest income provides the security she can no longer take for granted. They live quietly in a small town where no one knows her history, where she can pretend her previous life never happened. I receive updates on all of them through my network of contacts, not out of concern, but out of completeness. Documentation is a lifelong habit, and their ongoing struggles complete the record of consequences that began with their laughter at my expense. Tonight, as Aurelia and I finish our dinner, I reflect on the mathematics of justice. For people attempted to humiliate and exploit me. One is dead by his own panic. One is an ex-convict rebuilding his life from nothing. One is a convicted felon working for wages she once spent on lunch. One has disappeared into anonymity and remarriage. Meanwhile, I sit in the city's finest restaurant, surrounded by respect I've earned through decades of treating others with dignity, managing a trust fund that helps people rebuild their lives with substance rather than entitlement. Any regrets? Aurelia asks as we settle the evening's bill. Always my pleasure, never my obligation. I consider the question seriously. Do I regret the destruction of relationships that were built on financial exploitation? Do I regret cutting off people who told me I should settle for cheaper restaurants? Do I regret refusing to fund the comfortable lives of people who saw me as a convenient ATM rather than a human being deserving of respect? None, I reply, adjusting my pearl necklace for the final time this evening. I regret only that it took me so long to understand their true nature. As we prepare to leave, I notice a young couple at a nearby table, the woman crying quietly while the man gestures with angry insistence about something. Financial stress, most likely. Family pressure. The kind of crisis that reveals character. I don't intervene. Some lessons can't be taught, they can only be learned through direct experience with consequences. Outside Aurelia, the December air is crisp and clean. My driver waits by the curb, but I choose to walk the 6 blocks to my apartment building, savoring the city lights and the weight of decisions that have finally reached their intended conclusions. In my mailbox, there's a Christmas card from Tommy at the corner market where this story began so many years ago. Inside, his careful handwriting wishes me peace and happiness in the new year. Real wishes from someone who asks nothing beyond common courtesy. I place the card on my mantelpiece beside similar greetings from the doorman who always remembers my name, the pharmacist who saves my favorite magazines, the bookstore clerk who orders my preferred authors in hardcover. These people, strangers who became friends through mutual respect, understand something my children never learned. Relationships are built on reciprocity, not entitlement. As I prepare for bed, I pass the empty chair in my living room, the chair where family members once sat during visits that always seemed to involve requests for money. It's been empty for over 2 years now, and I've made no effort to fill it. Some chairs are meant to stay empty. Some tables are better served by their absence than their presence. Tomorrow I'll wake up in my beautiful apartment, review the trust fund's quarterly reports, and continue building the life I was told wasn't worth a restaurant reservation. I'll do this surrounded by people who earn their places through respect rather than DNA, funded by money that now serves substance over sentiment. My children will wake up to the permanent consequences of their temporary cruelty, living with the daily reminder that dismissing someone as worthless can be the most expensive mistake of your life. The mathematics are clean, the documentation complete, the justice served with the precision of a perfectly prepared meal. I don't break bread with ungrateful mouths. I endow better appetites. If this story of dignity triumphing over cruelty has moved you, please like this video and subscribe for more empowering tales. Remember, it's never too late to set boundaries and demand the respect you deserve. Our book, Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain, contains the strategies and mindset shifts that helped Amelia transform from victim to victor. Don't let anyone convince you that family entitlement should override your self-respect. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let people face the consequences of their choices. Click the link in the description and start your own journey toward unshakable dignity today. Because the most beautiful revenge is a life so well lived that it makes cruelty irrelevant.